Have you ever thought about how one wrong decision or a simple, innocent action can lead to a tragedy? Picture a couple deciding to go kayaking on one of the riskiest days of the year. What started as a fun adventure ended in a way so shocking, it's hard to comprehend. Where do we draw the line between an honest mistake and a fateful error? How can one small action or word change everything? By the end of this story, you might find yourself questioning every detail. Angelica's story is a chilling example of how life can change in an instant. The Hudson Valley, with its breathtaking scenery and swift rivers, is a magnet for outdoor enthusiasts. Kayaking is especially popular among thrill seekers, but the river is unforgiving. Even experienced athletes can make mistakes. Angelica Graswald and Vincent Viafore shared a love for the water, seeing it as a source of freedom and connection. On April 19, 2015, they set out on the Hudson River, excited for another adventure. The day began with promise, but the rising winds and rough waves were warning signs. Their goal was a small island with a castle steeped in Scottish-inspired mystery, a place that always captivated them. After a day exploring, evening fell, and the situation grew dire. The waves were growing stronger, and the icy waters signaled danger. Staying on the island overnight without proper gear wasn't an option, so they decided to head back. As they paddled against the growing chaos, Vincent's kayak started taking on water. Without a life jacket and submerged in the freezing river, he was in critical danger. Angelica, in a panic, called emergency services, explaining through tears that she couldn't reach him because of the powerful waves pulling him further away. The dispatcher struggled to locate them, losing precious time. As rescuers scrambled to reach the scene, Vincent disappeared beneath the surface. By the time help arrived, it was too late. The dark, choppy waters showed no sign of Vincent, and the evening sky only deepened the despair. This tragic series of events is a haunting reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. Let's learn more about Angelica. At 35, she was an ambitious woman pursuing a career in photography, a passion she envisioned as her future. Born Angelica Lipska in Latvia, she longed for a better life beyond her homeland. After 2 marriages and divorces, her dream remained the same: to settle in the US, secure a work visa, and build a career. Her break came when she got a job as a nanny and moved to the States. Life took a dramatic turn when she met Vincent. Vincent, 46, was a successful construction professional who had also been through 2 divorces. Despite their age difference, their relationship blossomed quickly. Vincent was known for his generosity, hosting parties and enjoying a vibrant social life. It was at one of these gatherings that he met Angelica. Just weeks later, she moved into his home in Poughkeepsie, New York. Their relationship escalated rapidly, with talks of marriage and children becoming common. But under the surface, cracks were beginning to show. On April 18, 2015, just a day before the tragedy, the couple attended a party. While Vincent was lively and engaging with his friends, Angelica left early, citing that she wasn't feeling well. She seemed distant, interacting minimally and avoiding attention. Vincent's friends noticed a visible tension between the two, which led to a small but noticeable argument. Nothing major happened that night, and they went their separate ways until the next morning. The following day, Vincent proposed a kayaking trip, hoping it would help them reconnect and mend their strained bond. Despite the chilly weather and increasing wind, Angelica agreed. They planned to visit Bannerman's Castle, a historic ruin on an island in the middle of the Hudson River, where Angelica hoped to capture stunning photos. She even brought elegant outfits for a photo session, eager to make the most of the day. By noon, the couple was ready to set off, unaware of the tragic turn their day would soon take. At the water's edge, Angelica and Vincent prepared for what they thought would be another exciting adventure. The wind howled, growing stronger by the minute, and massive waves began to rise. The biting cold made every movement feel heavy. Angelica noticed the worsening weather, but Vincent's love for adrenaline and his stubborn determination kept them moving forward. Before they launched, Vincent said something Angelica would never forget: "This will be the adventure of your life." Those words would take on a haunting significance just hours later. The journey to Bannerman's Castle went smoothly at first. Angelica later told the police that they had shared a couple of beers before setting off, just to set the mood, but were careful to stay sober for the paddle back. Yet, despite their precautions, The return trip turned into a nightmare. The wind and waves intensified, and Vincent began to lag behind. He shouted that his kayak was taking on water. Angelica turned back and saw his kayak sinking. She tried to paddle toward him, but the powerful currents pulled her toward the shore. By the time she reached land, she frantically called emergency services, but Vincent had already vanished into the icy waters of the Hudson River. The evening of April 19, 2015, marked the start of a desperate search. Rescue teams worked through the night and into the next day. Divers plunged into the murky water, sonar-equipped boats combed the river, and helicopters scanned the area. Despite their tireless efforts, Vincent was nowhere to be found. His family and friends were devastated, clinging to the faint hope that he might have survived, though the odds were slim in such freezing water and against the strong currents. Amid the grief and panic, Angelica's behavior stood out. Unlike Vincent's loved ones, who were consumed with worry, she appeared unusually calm. She even continued to update her social media, posting photos and videos, as if nothing had happened. This deeply upset Vincent's family, who found her actions not only inappropriate but also suspicious. Angelica claimed she was holding on to hope, waiting for her fiancé to return, but her demeanor only widened the gap between her and the grieving relatives. 10 days after Vincent's disappearance, Angelica was called back to the police station for further questioning. The reason? A seemingly offhand comment she had made during her initial conversation with detectives, one that would raise even more questions about her role in the tragic events. Angelica made a startling admission during questioning. She mentioned that she might have accidentally removed the drain plug from Vincent's kayak before they started paddling back. This small but critical detail changed everything, shifting the investigation from a tragic accident to something potentially sinister. Suddenly, investigators were asking more questions, and the idea of Vincent's death being purely accidental began to seem less plausible. Angelica also mentioned that Vincent's paddle had a broken locking ring, making it difficult to row properly. This, combined with the missing drain plug, raised alarms for investigators. Could these issues have been deliberate? The possibility of foul play was now on the table, but the big question remained: why? To dig deeper, detectives turned to people who knew Angelica and Vincent. One key interview was with Angelica's ex-boyfriend, Michael Coven, who had lived with her years earlier. Michael was shocked to hear about the suspicions surrounding Angelica, but admitted that her calm demeanor sometimes masked a darker side. He described how Angelica could become confrontational during arguments, particularly when drinking a side of her Vincent reportedly tolerated quietly. More revelations came from Vincent himself. Just weeks before the tragedy, he confided in a friend that he was having second thoughts about marrying Angelica. He described her as manipulative and aggressive, particularly during moments of conflict. This information painted a picture of a relationship that was far from perfect. When detectives questioned Angelica further, she admitted there were conflicts in their relationship but insisted they were personal and unrelated to Vincent's death. However, her vague and ambiguous answers only heightened suspicions. Slowly, the narrative was shifting. Vincent's death seemed less like an accident and more like a deliberate act. The turning point came when investigators uncovered Angelica's potential financial motive. She was the primary beneficiary of Vincent's $500,000 life insurance policy, a sum that could solve her financial troubles and give her a fresh start. At the time of the tragedy, Angelica was unemployed, and this money represented a life-changing opportunity. This discovery transformed Angelica from a grieving fiancé to the prime suspect. Despite the growing evidence against her, she continued to insist on her innocence, maintaining that Vincent's death was nothing more than a tragic accident. The prosecution charged Angelica with second-degree criminal wrongdoing, leading to her arrest and a bail set at $9 million, a sum far beyond her means. Given her foreign nationality, investigators feared she might flee, so Angelica remained in custody as she awaited trial. Her defense team argued that her statements during the grueling 11-hour interrogation were not admissible as solid evidence. Angelica's attorney emphasized that Vincent's body had not yet been recovered, making it impossible to confirm any foul play or intentional wrongdoing. According to the defense, Vincent's death was a tragic accident. They suggested the kayak likely capsized due to a wave, and the drain plug might have come loose as a consequence, not as a cause. To support their claims, the defense conducted an experiment on the Hudson River. A man with a similar build to Vincent sat in an identical kayak model. The test revealed that even under calm conditions, the kayak sat very low in the water, just a few inches above the surface. The demonstration showed how large waves could have easily flooded the vessel, even without the drain plug issue. Adding to their case, the defense pointed out that Vincent had consumed alcohol before the trip, which could have impaired his coordination and reaction time. This, combined with the unstable kayak and rough conditions, might have led to the accident. With a flooded kayak, questionable confessions, and conflicting evidence, the case sparked heated debate. The investigation focused heavily on the drain plug, a tiny opening no larger than a fingertip. It was hard to believe such a small detail could have caused the kayak to sink. The drain plug on Vincent's kayak was located on top, making it unlikely that it could have allowed enough water to sink the vessel quickly. In response, the defense insisted on further testing. Using the same kayak model, a man of Vincent's size, and conditions that mirrored the fateful day, they conducted another simulation. The results were telling. Even with the drain plug removed, the kayak did not fill with water rapidly. The small hole allowed only a slow trickle of water, not nearly enough to capsize the vessel in a short period. These findings added significant doubts to the prosecution's theory. Without a recovered body or clear forensic evidence, the case against Angelica was increasingly built on circumstantial evidence and speculation. The defense's experiments revealed that even without the drain plug, Vincent's kayak could have easily made the 1-mile journey back to shore. This undermined the prosecution's claim that the missing plug alone caused the tragedy. When the theory about the plug fell apart, the prosecution shifted their focus to the paddle. Angelica had stated that Vincent's paddle was damaged, missing a locking ring. Investigators suggested that this might have hindered his ability to control the kayak. However, the defense countered this claim with another demonstration. They showed that the absence of the locking ring did not impact the paddle's functionality. It remained sturdy, effective, and fully operational. Despite this, the prosecution leaned heavily on Angelica's own admissions during her interrogation. She had admitted to touching both Vincent's paddle and the kayak's drain plug, which became central to the case against her. For investigators, these admissions seemed to support the idea of a premeditated crime. Even small details like touching the paddle or brushing against the plug were framed as deliberate actions. But Angelica's defense team argued that her words had been taken out of context, pointing to the intense psychological pressure she had endured during her 11-hour interrogation. To bolster their case, the defense brought in an expert on false confessions who reviewed the entire recorded questioning session. The expert argued that the police used techniques designed to elicit a confession through coercion. These included leading questions, the classic good cop, bad cop approach, and denying Angelica time to process what was happening. They also pressured her to repeat phrases that supported their narrative. During the interrogation, Angelica frequently appeared confused, her answers growing increasingly vague and her emotions unstable. The expert emphasized that she was in a state of shock, and her statements should have been viewed with caution. One particular phrase became a focal point for the prosecution. Angelica had fleetingly mentioned that she had once thought about being free from her relationship with Vincent. Detectives interpreted this as a confession of intent to harm him. The defense, however, argued that the remark referred to the general strain in their relationship and was unrelated to the events of that day. The false confessions expert noted that at no point did Angelica use words like crime or death in relation to this statement. The police, however, chose to frame her vague comment as a direct admission of guilt, further fueling suspicions. The defense maintained that Angelica's admissions during the interrogation were not a reflection of the truth, but rather the result of manipulation by the investigators. Once the detectives heard statements they could use against her, they ignored her subsequent clarifications. The defense argued that Vincent's kayak had long-standing issues, including a faulty drain plug that had been a problem for months. Angelica claimed they had kayaked several times without the plug, and it had never caused significant trouble. According to the defense, the true cause of the tragedy was the dangerous weather conditions that day, not any intentional actions. However, the prosecution insisted on their theory: a woman tired of her relationship, seeking financial gain, staging an accident to collect insurance money, and starting anew. Angelica's interrogation became a grueling ordeal. she lost track of time and felt trapped, cornered by the relentless questioning. Initially, she tried to stand firm, but the detectives kept circling back to the issue of the drain plug, gradually wearing her down. Her account of the plug's presence or absence became inconsistent, a confusion that the investigators capitalized on. The turning point came when Angelica, emotionally and physically drained, asked to leave so she could feed her cat at home. Tears welled up in her eyes, a moment of vulnerability that the detectives seized. They intensified their questioning, firing a series of leading inquiries designed to elicit incriminating responses. Despite her emotional state, Angelica never directly confessed to any crime. Still, the police refused to back off, interpreting her unclear answers as signs of guilt. An expert who later analyzed the interrogation footage noted that Angelica appeared overwhelmed, exhausted, and unable to think clearly. Her inconsistent responses were, in their view, typical of someone experiencing emotional and mental fatigue, not of someone admitting to wrongdoing. The expert explained that Angelica's primary motivation during the questioning was to bring the ordeal to an end, leading her to provide vague or muddled answers. Her unclear statements became the cornerstone of the prosecution's narrative, even though they were arguably the product of her desperation to escape the relentless interrogation. Vincent's disappearance left his family and friends in emotional turmoil, their grief compounded by uncertainty. Nearly a month later, on May 23, 2015, a boater found Vincent's body in the Hudson River near Bannerman's Island, where he and Angelica had gone that fateful day. The autopsy confirmed the cause of death as drowning, with no evidence of foul play or struggle. Vincent's blood showed traces of alcohol, though not enough to significantly impair him, suggesting the harsh weather and frigid water were the primary factors in his death. Vincent's kayak was also recovered, missing the drain plug and with a paddle lacking its locking ring. The defense maintained that these details were minor and insufficient to explain the tragedy. According to them, the real culprits were the extreme conditions that day: icy water, strong winds, the lack of a life jacket, and Vincent's decision to venture out despite these risks. The prosecution, however, focused on Angelica's inconsistent statements, using them to build their case. They argued that Angelica had intentionally sabotaged the kayak, creating a scenario where Vincent had little chance of survival. Their theory painted her as a calculating woman, staging an accident for personal gain. Angelica's lawyer countered this by emphasizing Vincent's own choices. He had willingly gone kayaking under dangerous conditions, without proper safety gear, and while slightly under the influence of alcohol. These actions, the defense argued, pointed to his own recklessness rather than any malicious intent on Angelica's part. Despite these arguments, Angelica's behavior after Vincent's disappearance remained a sticking point for the prosecution. Her social media posts and calm demeanor were portrayed as suspicious, even though her defense claimed they reflected her unique way of coping with the tragedy. Angelica continued to assert her innocence, maintaining that the events of that day were nothing more than a heartbreaking accident. But as the legal battle unfolded, her statements, the missing drain plug, and the damaged paddle remained central to a case that divided public opinion and kept the spotlight on the mysterious circumstances of Vincent's death. The case took an unexpected turn when the prosecution decided to re-evaluate its strategy. They realized that proving Angelica had intentionally caused Vincent's death would be nearly impossible to convince a jury. The theories surrounding the removed drain plug or a broken paddle were considered too circumstantial and speculative to establish intent beyond a reasonable doubt. Furthermore, the defense's arguments and expert testimonies significantly undermined the foundation of the prosecution's case. It became clear that the tragedy could have been the result of a combination of adverse weather conditions, faulty equipment, and poor judgment on Vincent's part, particularly his decision to kayak without a life jacket in dangerous conditions. Faced with these challenges, the prosecution opted to offer Angelica a plea deal. If she admitted guilt to involuntary manslaughter, she would serve a reduced sentence of 4 years in prison, a far cry from the life sentence initially sought. The plea deal and sentencing. Angelica accepted the deal, seeing it as a way to avoid the uncertainty of a trial that could have ended with a harsher punishment. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison. However, because she had already spent significant time in custody while awaiting trial and during the court proceedings, her actual time left to serve was minimal. In December 2017, after serving 32 months, Angelica was released on parole. For Vincent's family, this outcome felt like an insult to their loss. They remained vocal about their dissatisfaction, believing that Angelica had orchestrated the events leading to Vincent's death. They viewed the plea deal as a failure of the justice system, allowing someone they deemed guilty to walk free after serving what they considered an inadequate sentence. Angelica's post-release struggles. After her release, Angelica faced immense challenges. Public opinion in the US was largely against her, and Vincent's family's public statements painted her in a negative light. Her guilty plea also barred her from claiming Vincent's $500,000 life insurance policy, which had been cited as a potential motive for the alleged crime. Furthermore, her status as a foreign national meant she was at risk of deportation. 16 months after her release, Angelica was forced to return to her home country. Back in her homeland, she attempted to rebuild her life. She enrolled in university, secured a job, and worked to move forward, leaving the traumatic events behind. Despite these efforts, the case continued to haunt her. In interviews, she maintained her innocence, insisting that Vincent's death was a tragic accident caused by circumstances beyond her control. Lingering questions and unresolved tensions. The conclusion of the legal proceedings did little to bring closure. Vincent's family remained adamant in their belief that Angelica was responsible for his death, unable to reconcile her actions before and after the tragedy with her claims of innocence. They were especially critical of her demeanor in the immediate aftermath of Vincent's disappearance, including her calm behavior and social media activity, which they found inappropriate and suspicious. On the other hand, Angelica defended her actions, claiming she was in shock and trying to maintain hope. She described her time in custody as harrowing and insisted that the confession she gave during the 11-hour interrogation was coerced and misunderstood. She continued to assert that only she and God knew the truth, and she expressed regret over the tragedy without admitting to any deliberate wrongdoing. Legacy of the case. The case remained a topic of debate, with many questioning whether justice had been served. While the legal proceedings had concluded, the mystery of what truly happened on the Hudson River persisted. The tragedy served as a cautionary tale about the unpredictability of nature, the consequences of poor judgment, and the devastating impact of unresolved questions surrounding sudden loss. Even after returning to her home country, Angelica's life was forever altered. She became a polarizing figure, with some sympathizing with her plight, and others believing she had escaped true accountability. For Vincent's family and friends, the pain of his loss lingered, compounded by their frustration with the justice system and their enduring suspicions about Angelica's role in his death.